Hello, just a quick video to share some thoughts I just had on heroic scale versus true scale, which follows on from a couple of videos I've done on that subject. Okay, so let me just say a few things about what brought me to making this video. I had made a video looking at the Northmen line of from Fireforge Games from their Forgotten World Kickstarter, which I reviewed, and I compared it against some GW heroic scale to see if it would fit with heroic scale. And then later I did a video reviewing Perry Mercenaries against Games Workshop handgunners to see how well they look against each other. Of course, the Perry miniatures are true scale and the Games Workshop are heroic scale. And one of the things we saw in that video was that heroic scale isn't a standard against each other, right? It varies a lot. So the question of whether you can use true scale with heroic kind of went semi-unanswered because although it looked terrible, pretty much terrible, next to the newish GW plastic kit for the handgunners, it didn't look so bad against an older metal character called Otto, which I call him Otto. Actually, I'm not sure he's a real name. He's an Imperial Engineer, which actually he's there on the picture. So second from the right, Otto. So I think you can see there in that picture that Otto doesn't look so bad next to the Perry, the true scale Perry on the right. Especially, you got to remember, you're looking at these little dudes from about 3 feet away on the tabletop. So actually, the inconsistencies you see up close probably aren't so bad when you're at a distance. But Otto just looks like a big chap next to the true scale Perry. He doesn't look, to my eyes, overly wrongly proportioned. But anyway, so I was thinking, well, okay, so I've compared the Northmen to older heroics. I mean, it was a Bretonian archer, a plastic Bretonian archer from ages back, and Otto himself, who's a metal character from quite a long time ago. So how would he look? How would the Northman stand up next to a GW gunner from a newish kit, which we decided, I decided, in that Perry review was kind of grossly misproportioned, especially the gun, as you can still see there. The gun is quite a bit oversized on the one on the far left there. Okay, so let's just quickly introduce the stars of this show. These four fine gentlemen, these heroes. Actually, if the Northmen had a gun, they could be the Four Musketeers, couldn't they? But he doesn't, so they're not. Okay, so this one on the far right there is, as I already said, really, true scale Perry Mercenary. And next to him, second from the right, is Otto, well, who I call Otto, the Hochland long rifle wielding Imperial Engineer from probably a few decades ago. I don't know. He's a metal heroic scale from Games Workshop. And second from the left is the Northman Spearman from Fireforge Games, who is kind of heroic scale, or it's meant to be, and kind of is. But as we'll see, not yeah. Let me just marshal my thoughts. All right, well, let's just carry on. Okay, so that's Northman, Spearman, and next to him on the far left is the strangely proportioned Games Workshop heroic scale handgun dude who is a relatively newer kit in plastic. Um, Alright, before we start fumbling around comparing model by model, I'll just explain why three of these chaps look like they've been painted in black and white. Some of you may not know about this technique of painting. But what I favour now for painting quite consistent shading and highlights is to paint what I call a light map, or I think artists call a value sketch, in sort of black and white, starting with black, building up to white highlights. So it's in completely neutral colours, just showing where the lights are, and then I just glaze over that with colour to make it, and that's quite quick, quite a quick way of getting quite consistent lighting and highlights, shading on a model. So I tend to do that these days. And if I ever do a video in the future of how to do a value sketch or a light map, the link will be here. And if it's not here, it's because I haven't made the video yet. So just wait, will you? Alright, now, so we got three shades of heroic, one of which is not even a GW miniature, the Northmen, against one true scale. And we're just going to kind of fumble around looking at how the subtle differences between them, the different, the different heroics we've got here. Right? So, okay, so this is the Perry true scale against Otto, the older heroic metal. And obviously Otto's hands are big, right? They are big. But I think you can use, I would feel okay with using Otto alongside true scale, right? Bearing in mind, most of the time, you're looking at these from 3 feet away. So you're not, the small differences aren't so noticeable. And, you do expect people to vary in sizes. So just having him a bit big is not a problem, I would say. If heroic was just a bit big, that would be quite okay. It's the proportions. It's the fat proportions that I think is where, and the giant sized weapons is a problem as well. Now Otto has a giant sized weapon, but it isn't. It is a Hochland long rifle, so it's meant to be big anyway. Like it's like a Giselle, right? So it's a big gun anyway. But the actual model of the gun isn't as bad as, it isn't as oversized as, for example, the handgunner's kit, the Hochland long rifle in the handgunner's kit, which we looked at in the other video, the review of the handgunners and the Perrys. So I think I can get away with Otto as a hero in amongst true scale minis. Alright, and this is Otto up against the Northmen. And kind of the interesting thing about the Northman is, alright, he is meant to be heroic and he kind of is a bit big. But if you look at his hands are not that badly proportioned. I mean, they're not. He could be just somewhere, a bit like Otto. He's somewhere in between the extremes of heroic scale and true scale. So I think in a true scale army, he could pass for just a big chap, right? Because look at his hands, his head. He's a bit thick, and his feet, his legs are quite chunky as well. If you look compared to Otto's, but it's not that outlandish. He's not that badly proportioned. He's just a big chap. So you could have a regiment of big chaps. I mean, even historically, there was some mad Austrian duke who went all over the world recruiting the tallest men for his regiment. Like I think might be something you might want to Google. It's quite a fun story. Bit grim as well because he was quite a bit obsessive about it. But yeah, so he had a regiment of grenadiers or something, and they were all like 7 feet tall or something. So you could have a regiment of big chaps or little chaps, I think, and it might work. It's more the proportions than the size. I think you can get away with a little bit of variation in just height. Um, and okay, just a quick look at Otto next to the GW handgun. Now, as you can see, actually, Otto's hands are actually quite big. They're quite comparable to the other handgunner there, which is not good. But it's the gun though that's the really bad about the GW handgunner on the left there, and that's where the heroic scale's going a bit wonky. Is unbearably bad to my eyes. Is that huge gun? I think he's a bit of a caricature of himself if you look how he's styled it. And he's not even the worst of that kit because his head is actually almost like a Perry head. It was, as we saw in the other video, it was most of the other heads were actually a lot worse than that one as far as being wrongly proportioned or fat, right? So, but these two, I don't know. You could use them against each other quite okay, I guess. So Otto's sort of like I would say Otto's, apart from his big hands, he's a bit of a middle ground. You know, you could stick him almost anywhere. You could put him in true scale, and he's just a big chap. You put him against other heroics, and he doesn't look unheroic, if that makes sense. So the metal minis, the older metal minis of GW are actually kind of usable anywhere, I think. Yeah, I don't think that's too bad. Now this is the pairing that I think just doesn't work. I wouldn't put these two against each other, next to each other in the same army. I just wouldn't. Okay. Uh, if you're more of a gamer than you are a hobbyist, you might not care that much. Just it's just a game piece, like a chess piece or something. Who cares what it looks like, as long as you know what it is, right? But if you're more of a hobbyist as well, or you're kind of half and half, I think that might bother you. It bothers me, right? So I would not do that. The GW gun's too big. These other proportions are wrong, but I think at 3 feet away you're not going to notice so much. It's really the gun that sticks out as being oversized. And so this is the Northman and the gunner, the GW gunner. They're both heroic, and they're okay next to each other. I think. Looking at them from the back, yeah, yeah, you can see the Northman's got quite chunky legs actually. Um, but other than that, he fits fairly well, surprisingly. Although his spear is obviously not unreasonably proportioned, so there is always that weapon issue. That was always where that GW gunner kit was where most of the warpage was in the weapon. So it's not that surprising that the rest of him fits reasonably well. Now this is the pairing I really want to look at and why I made this video. Is to see how well the supposedly heroic Northman stands up against a true scale Perry miniature. And if you look at that, it's really not so bad, is it? He's a bit thick set, the Northman. There's not really anything in it in the height. Maybe he's a little bit taller, just a whisker taller perhaps. But because his weapon isn't oversized and his hands aren't oversized, I think he would blend in even better amongst true scale models like the Perry on the right than Otto would, because of Otto. Although Otto's not bad, he's not overly heroic because he's an older metal mini. His hands are a bit big actually. That's his one flaw, I would say. His hands are a bit big. But yeah, the Northman's fine. I'm not wondering if he's only heroic in that his torso is a little bit thick set and his legs are quite chunky. But his arms, there's nothing in it, and his weapon isn't oversized, really. I mean, maybe the shaft of the spear might be a touch thick, but I wouldn't say it's not overly so. And a little bit of thickness in the shaft, misses. Is not bad for obviously preventing or minimising the chances of breakages. I mean, this is the one criticism I have of the Perry kit, is, although everything's very realistically proportioned, that does mean the pike shafts are actually quite thin, like very thin, almost like hair breadths. You know, they would look like they would snap very easily. I expect a lot of historical war gamers just cut them out and use brass rod or something, because I think they do that, right? Because that really fine plastic is just going to break. So yeah, a little bit of a chunky spear shaft is not a terrible thing, but it isn't grossly oversized. It's not like the GW handgunner's gun, right, or the crossbows even. It's not abnormal, not abnormally abnormal. It's tolerable. So they look all right next to each other, don't they? I mean, you could do that. You could have the Northman. He's a middle ground. He's a middle ground, like the older metal minis. He's a middle ground between heroic, like the more recent plastic heroics from GW, and real true scale historical miniatures. So you can use him in either. I would say. I would be okay with using him. You need a little bit of a backstory if you're fussy. That it's a regiment of big chaps. I mean, they are big chaps, so there is that. But it's not unsightly. I would say not unsightly at all. I would do it. All right, so this has turned out to be another quite long video. I had hoped it'd be a quick one, but we've got I don't know, probably 20 minutes or something by now. So, but there is a subtle thing I just noticed, which I think is worth pointing out. So what I'm going to do here is just have a look at the true scale Perry next to the Northman and the GW plastic gunner from the back, because there's a detail I've noticed about where the torsos join the arms. It's actually subtly different with the Northman. See, the Perry torsos look quite narrow, but when you put the arms on, you actually notice that a lot of the shoulder is in the arm. So the actual once you put the arms on, the shoulders get quite, they get a bit more width to them. And the GW gunners have the same thing. They have really wide, but they have wide torsos, but a lot of the shoulder is in the arm as well. So when you put the arms on, they get even wider. But the Northman isn't quite like that, actually, and I suppose it's because of the gear he's wearing, what's it called? It's like a gamson, full legs gamson or leather jack or something. So with that, where his torso looks as wide as the GW handgunner, but it actually includes quite a bit more of the shoulder, and his arms are kind of missing a part of the shoulder. It's sort of like if you feel on your shoulder, you got your collarbone, and you move along to the shoulder joint. Where I'll do it here. Look, right. So the Perry model and the GW handgunner, they made the cut here. So quite a fair bit of the shoulder is actually on the mini. But the Northman's actually a bit more onto the edge, where sort of like that. So his arm actually doesn't have that much of the shoulder in it. It sort of starts right at the top of the upper arm. So that makes the Northman is deceptively heroic in a way, because his torso isn't quite as wide as it looks once you put the arms on, and that might be why he fits in as a sort of middle ground between true scale like the Perry and full-blown mad heroic like the GW gunner. So yeah, that's just a small detail I thought I'd point out. Okay, so for the final conclusion, I would say from this is, because heroic scale is a bit variable, you can't really say it's totally incompatible with true scale. I did make that claim in the review between Perry and the GW handgunners. If you saw that video, I basically came down on the idea that you couldn't use both in one army, it would just look unsightly. But obviously the GW plastic gunner, as we've seen today, is fairly extreme heroic, and there are shades of heroic which are a bit more, which fit a bit better with true scale. So if you were doing a true scale Empire army, for example, which I'm leaning towards doing, or Bretonians, just for the obvious reason that a lot of these minis are quite cheap, right? The Perrys are cheap. We saw that in that video. They're at 50p a dude compared to like £2 for a Games Workshop model, or near enough £2. Um, you know, but I would say you wouldn't necessarily have to rule out using heroics, because the older metal minis and some of these third-party wannabe heroics, like the Northmen from Fireforge Games, they're actually, you know, not that bad. They're not that. They do fit a little bit well. So that's pretty much the conclusion to this video, I think. And I won't ramble on much more. But there is a word, I must sort of drop a word from my sponsor, which is in fact me. I am my own sponsor. Uh, this video is free, of course, but I'm kind of self-unemployed at the moment, or unemployed, or self-employed, but self-unemployed, which means I do have to earn money somehow. And I'd like to do this channel, as I enjoy making videos, and I hope you enjoy them too. And if you do, there's a few services I provide which you might find interesting, which would also help me out do this channel with, you know, keeping this channel going. One thing is I do graphics design for t-shirts and other merchandise and whatnot, and there's be a link in the description for my Redbubble account, where you can find a fair amount of Warhammer inspired art for t-shirts and tapestries and other knickknacks, so you could have a look at that. I would appreciate that. Another thing is, go to my blog, which is also going to have a link in the description, and there there's a contact form for commissioning me for painting miniatures. I do that as a service, and finally I have a eBay store where you can buy out-of-print Warhammer books for both Warhammer Fantasy Battles and 40k, some pre-painted minis that I knock out now and again, and just other wargaming stuff mostly. Although actually I have got some other stuff in there. I've got a ton of like hand knitted stuff that I didn't make it myself. My wife did, because she's great at knitting, wizard at knitting. Now I appreciate if you're watching a wargaming channel, you're probably a real geek like me, and hand knitted stuff is just not your thing. But you probably got like a girlfriend or a wife or a mother or a daughter or something who might dig that for a present. And they're very unique, you know, they're handmade stuff, so pretty cool. And all loads of other junk that I've got for sale, you know, because I do. So look out for that link as well in the description. And yeah, I really appreciate any help. Thanks, and bye.